Good morning. Hi, my name is Linda Hooper. I work at the UN Statistics Division. I'd like to welcome you to the second day of the World Data Forum. I have a couple of points of housekeeping that I'd like to just go through. Speakers, if you haven't already taken your PowerPoints to the speaker room, it's room 1.74. Please do that as soon as you have a chance. If you've taken a headset for interpretation, we'd like to remind you to return the headset after this session, after you leave the plenary room, to get your passport or your ID back. And then the final point is for this evening, we have the gala dinner. The buses will be outside the convention center at 6:30 at the close of the final session today, and we'd like you to join us there for the gala dinner tonight. And so now that those were the points, so now we'd like to welcome the panelists for the opening plenary this morning in the track of Understanding the World Through Data. The session is on capturing the 21st century through data and algorithms. So please, panelists, come. Daniel.
Come on up, panelists. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Hi, Ola. Why don't you, is there a name tag? Yeah, okay. Okay. I'm Dan Rundy. I hold the Schreier Chair at CSIS. I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion. We've got some very accomplished and thoughtful people who are going to be on this panel. I think one of the interesting questions is, why do we measure stuff? And do we have the tools to measure the right things? And what do we do about all these changes in technology and changes in methodologies? And what about private data? And how do we trust data? So I think there's a lot of questions as we have this brave new world of technology and information. What's trustable? What should we measure? Why do we measure it? I think these are the kinds of questions that have brought this group together. We have a distinguished group of folks. I'm going to ask each of them to very briefly self-identify themselves. You have the program in front of you when they speak. But I think you'll understand why we have this interesting group together. And so I know each of them is going to present some material, some of it visual. And then we're going to have a discussion amongst ourselves. But I've also asked that we have time for this group, which is a very knowledgeable group, to ask some thoughtful questions to the panelists, because I think that would be very important. So I'm going to, without further ado, I'm going to hand over the floor to Ola and Hans Rosling. Hans Rosling, I don't think, needs any introduction. He's the co-founder of the Gapminder Foundation. And Ola Rosling is the president and co-founder of the Gapminder Foundation. So Ola, the floor is yours.
1, 2. Yeah, it works. Good morning. Thanks for being here. Obviously, you are the serious sample, so my fact question testing will be quite skewed, of course. Ola Rosling, I'm running an educational nonprofit, which is independent from political and religious and economic affiliation. I'm the boss of Hans Rosling. I also happen to be his son. My wife and me and Jeroen will show the Dollar Street project later at 12:15 today in this room. Please come back then, because I'm going to show more things. Now I'm going to try to keep it short. So we're seeing my screen, and I'd like everybody to bring up their cell phones. And if God wants, the Wi-Fi will work quite well, or whatever you have. This is serious measuring business of knowledge. So I would like you to go to a website called sli.do, okay, Slido. You can search for Slido, and then there is a little box where I want you to type OLA, which is my first name. And when you've done that, and hopefully it works, we're going to run 3 fact questions to see the level of knowledge in this group. Can people signal when they are done by raising their hand if they are done? if they are actually on the page where they will see this fact question. Did anyone succeed? Anyone can see it on their screen? More hands, please. Okay, that's very, very few. So we're also going to do hand raising, and I got some hand counters on the first row. So let's do this. Anyone who is on the website with this question up should put it into the cell phone, and everyone else also does the hand raising. So women.
I'm going to raise my hand, and so others should raise. If you're not up yet online, please be prepared to raise your hand. Go ahead, Ola.
Thank you. What? The venture code is OLA. Okay. So let's get started. I'm also going to rely on the hand raising. Okay, let's do this. Women aged 30 on this planet totally. How long did they go to school? They spent how many years in school? And there's a hint here saying that men of the same age went 8 years to school. So the question is, did women go 7, 5, or 3 years to school on average, 30-year-old women today in the world? And now we'll do some hand raising. So my counters, can you check more or less the percentage and write it down? How many people think it's A, women went 7 years to school? Raise your hand. Okay, we're done. How many think it's B, women went 5 years to school? Raise your hand. And then C, women went 3 years to school. The panel is not voting because you did. Okay, hit it. And that was A, right? Yeah, A. Okay. So now we take question number 2. Are you ready? And I think I'm now just switching it online. What percentage of the world's 1-year-old children are vaccinated against measles? The world total number today. All the 1-year-old children, how many of them have gotten a vaccination against measles? Okay, you understood the question. So let's use the app or hand voting. A, 20% of children are vaccinated against measles, the 1-year-old. Okay. B, 50% of children are vaccinated against measles. And C, 80% of children are vaccinated against measles. Okay, this is interesting. I'm already seeing a story here coming through. Okay, this is the last question. In 1950, there were less than 1 billion children. I'm going to activate it on the app as well. But you need to look at the chart. You see the trend of children on this planet since 1950 up to 2010. That's the solid orange line. The 3 other lines, I'm going to ask, which one is the official UN estimate of children in the future? So in year 2000, there were almost 2 billion children. How many do UN experts think there will be 2100? Okay, how many think A, the official UN estimate for the future is 4 billion children? Raise your hands. And B, 3 billion children? Okay. And C, 2 billion children? Okay, good. Thank you very much. Now we're done with this part, and I'm going to deactivate the poll. There we go. Okay, so we've been measuring knowledge across a lot of different audiences, the public through online polls, and also in this kind of settings at different conferences for more or less 5 years now. And let's just look first at this question. The number of years which women went to school compared to men. So here you see the men went 8 years to school, and this we asked in Sweden, and these are the answers of the Swedish population in general. So 45% think that women went 3 years to school, and 46% think it's 5 years. The correct answer is 7, okay? Yeah. Why do we measure? Because if we communicate the situation of women on this planet and we give the impression that no girls are going to school, people might lose their hope, right? And they think there's not worth trying because it doesn't matter how much we tried before, it will never change. So we also went to USA and they scored slightly better than the Swedish public. Not close to, or actually similar to the TED audience. We gave a TED talk, me and Hans, presenting this ignorance project, which we're calling this project. And then we have a very special population in Sweden. You know, Swedish people are very special. We have a group of chimpanzees living in Stockholm in the zoo, and we went there and asked them the question, and we were very surprised by the result, because 33% of the chimpanzees pick the right banana if you write ABC on the bananas. And this is because, I mean, they are closer to the truth than all these other groups of intellectual and educated people. So we wondered, what the heck is this? And also observed that the US score better than the Swedes. And we figured it's probably because the US citizens are more like chimpanzees, you know, compared to the Swedes. Yes, that's actually my father's joke, so we should probably call him now. And before I call him, let's also see the South African result, which won over all the others. This is a big applause for South Africa. So the question is the perception of what's happening in the world. How do you get that picture? What are you seeing, and how do you create your worldview? And how do we know what people know before we run the communication campaigns? Before I call Hans, I also want to just show the results of this question. The official UN forecast is 2 billion children in the future. This line has already flattened out. I'm going to show a few slides after talking to Hans, explaining how this can even be possible. We all know that the population is going to grow. How can the number of children not grow? Okay? So the result when we ask this question, only 6% of the public in these countries, Sweden, US, Norway, UK, and South Africa. So South Africa is not superior in every sense, okay? Just so you understand that. And these audiences all haven't heard of the enormous phenomena which we call peak child. The amount of children born every year on this planet has stopped increasing, and people have no clue. They are still afraid of the overpopulation, and they haven't understood how demography works. This is how we've gone about to find where the ignorance in the world is, and trying to understand where this dramatic worldview comes from. So let's call Hans, and if we can get him up on the screen. There he is. So Hans, I hope you saw the results from the other audiences. I'm going to try to see what this audience results were on my laptop. But please now start by saying thank you for this wonderful prize that we both missed to get on the stage the other day. Welcome.
Yes, please. I'm very humbled to be with you from early morning in Sweden. And really, thank you very much for that prize. You know, is getting it from South Africa, where Pali had been my mentor for more than a decade, was emotional for me. But what you bring up now, Ola, has been one of the main shocks that you caused me. I thought it was enough to become famous, to have impact. You know, people liked me, they looked at me at YouTube. It was shocking when I realized that we didn't manage to get through with the program world. That now girls go to primary schools and the contraceptives are being used in the majority of the world population. It's like the worldview is missing. A lot of communication does not reach people, change their knowledge. And what's for me, I mean, I'm basically a public health professor from the university. I got shocked when I discovered the group knows the world best. It's the CEOs of the big international companies and those who run the big financial institutions. It's that those who deal with money, they have stronger, and big money, I should say, they have stronger incentives of learning how the world really is. that are we that are moving it in politics or in activism or in academia. That was really shocking to me. And the way that Ola and Anna has forced me to continue to measure has been very educative. We've come to the conclusion there is no way we can communicate the SDGs if we don't measure the impact of our communication. Because today people don't know that already 85% of children in the world get the most important vaccine. They don't know that most women have contraceptives. To fulfill the noble goal of 1.1, eliminate extreme poverty, we have to start knowing the facts and then focus on the places where extreme poverty is. But also, don't think about the data that all the good national statistic offices are producing as mainly being for activism, politics, and aid. It's for big money. The amazing progress in Africa is not understood, at least not in West Europe and North America. You know, the world has to get to know all countries. See, this is a country we can invest in. This is where we could have partnership, building railways. And that corner of the country is extremely poor. They deserve aid. So I think one should really broaden the ambition of who should use the data. And also, I think schools is more important. That I leave over to you, Ola. But that is our main conclusion, is that media is a bad way, bad way to have people to really change their worldview and grasp it. They have to be taught it in school.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Ola, we should wrap it up shortly.
Oh, yes. So I have 10 more ignorance questions, which I'm not asking you.
Yes, please don't do that, but thank you.
Okay, if you interrupt more, I'm going to lose even more time. Okay, let's do this. Instead, I want to show you how we believe that the world can be understood through data by everyone, by creating a worldview which is fact-based, that is understandable. So I'm going to run one of these crash explanations, which we do in schools and help teachers do to their students to fix this problem. And it's not going to show you a dashboard. It's going to give you a worldview. Okay, so let's kickstart.
Ola, let me just give you a moment on time. I understand it, you'll go a little longer, but we're now at 17 minutes, and we had a discussion about this beforehand that you would honor our time, so please be cognizant.
Okay, so I saved this for the 12:15 presentation. Everybody promised to come here. Can you raise your hand if you promise?
Promise to come.
Yeah?
Promise to come.
Okay, promise to come. No, you should raise your hand if you promise to come.
I'm promising.
Yes, please. Okay, so then I leave this part and leave the floor for the next panel. I had no clue 17 minutes has passed.
Okay.
That's what happens when you're having fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Excellent. Good. Thank you very much, Ola. Okay, Manu, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Okay, actually, no, Polly, you're up next. You are the chief statistician of Statistics South Africa, but I don't think you need an introduction because everybody in this room knows you. So thanks for being here.
Statistician General of South Africa, not of Statistics South Africa. That distinction is very important because the discussion is about how you organize the national statistics system, not the statistics of the unit. Yes, okay. Thank you very much. I thought I would try and move on where Ola had ended, to try and not so much illustrate the complexity, but argue that in order to undo the complexity, a narrative is very important. And yet a narrative is also not complete. Here we are looking at data from South Africa, collated in 2016, and we will talk about migration, deaths, and longevity, and see how all this add up to the complex picture, and how the results of this have to probably be interpreted, and the statistics office leading this. Now, what we are seeing here, if I get this right, this is a province called Gauteng This is the province Western Cape. These are trends of movement into this particular province, and you can see it's a magnet, as you see people moving from different provinces into this province. So you see people moving into the Western Cape and into Gauteng. These are the most attractive provinces. Now, how do we look at migration? Which groups of people move in there? That's the black population into these provinces and into Western Cape. The colored population has a very different pattern of movement from the Western Cape, largely to the Northern Cape. And that's where you find the colored population, very good affinity, and a lot of them moving from there. And then, of course, the Indian population, largely indented labor that was there for sugarcane plantation. That's why KwaZulu-Natal has a bigger population of Indians. And of course, they migrate to Gauteng. And then, of course, you got migration of whites into the Western Cape. And of course, that's what they do as they retire. What happens to black elderly? Black elderly, they had come to these places of work, which are urban, but they go back to their provinces of origins, like Limpopo, so that they go there to die. So these are the dynamics. I mean, if you switch to whites, the white population, 65, they move out of Gauteng having made the money, and they retire in the Western Cape to enjoy their money. Same age groups. So the narrative is a very interesting one, and it has to be told in the way we understand it. Now, if you look at age-standardized deaths per 1,000 population, you can see the number of people that die in the Free State. It has a population of about 3.3 million, Western Cape 5.6 million, Eastern Cape 6 million, Gauteng 13 million, KwaZulu-Natal 14 million. You have seen the migration patterns of the elderly, how they move out of the different provinces, and largely they move to the Eastern Cape, they move to Limpopo, and then standardized rates of death, or rather standardized death rates here, are lower in Gauteng, lower in Western Cape, which are the magnets of migration. But we have seen the pattern of movement. So when you talk about death rates and life expectancy, you actually have to think about the exporting of death at the time when these people retire to join their ancestors from the village where they come. So understanding mortality and therefore death rates in provinces is a function of how society is organized and how you decide to go to your ancestors, and they are not in the urban areas, they are in the rural areas where you go. Now, coming to issues of mortality, or rather what has happened to life expectancy in South Africa over a period of time, that's South Africa, and of course, we would like to do a bit of drill down, and that's where all I was going to. And we can look at life expectancy in South Africa against income. And we can see that it was rather flat, and it grew as income grew, but we were hit around 2004, 2005 by the scourge of AIDS. And where did we? Sorry. Oh, yes, I started where there was a turning point on life expectancy in South Africa. If I had started earlier, you'd see how that life expectancy panned out. But it's not enough to give an aggregate number for South Africa on life expectancy. We have interpolated the media estimates over 3 points, and you can't see the growth in income as a consequence of that. But we could drill down into provinces. Let me move this. And here you can see that's the province of Gauteng. That's the province to be. You live slightly longer, Western Cape. That's the last place on earth in South Africa before you join yourself with your ancestors. That's why it has very high life expectancy. And of course, here is the Free State with, there is the Free State there. There you have to avoid the Free State because you'll die younger. So the numbers that we are showing and playing here is how life expectancy against income has changed over time in South Africa. But we can not only show it we don't only show it for the national figure, but we also show it by province. And it's differential. And we can disaggregate to this level using the tools, and we have been working with Gapminder Foundation to get to this. And finally, what about child mortality? I mean, here I want to show that geography counts. Unless we are deliberate about embedding spatial in statistics, then the situation becomes very difficult. It is basically a technical problem, but is driven by political imperatives. And this technical problem you can see, and I'll try and stop it, where it suddenly shows that some provinces or some municipalities disappear. The bubbles represent municipalities. And in 2004, you can see, you can track the changes in child mortality. But if you go beyond that point, you'll realize that this child mortality, not only child mortality disappears, but municipalities disappear. And it's a function of changes in municipal boundaries. And when these things are not synchronized with the operations of statistics, it creates a problem. It's not a problem that cannot be solved. It can be solved. But in terms of timeliness of data and the decisions as to when municipalities are changed, when you run your surveys, when you measure, create a major problem. And that is why we are not able to demonstrate what has happened to child mortality beyond 2004 because of the changes in boundaries. We are fixing that. But geography and that, so whatever I said, there are three things that I've said. Demonstrating and illustrating or talking about complexity is the task of statisticians. And you can't project this pain to your audience when you show value. It's like going to a doctor and he tells you how hard he studied when he has to cure you. What you need is medicine, you want the penicillin and you go. Now, we can't project that, our pain. We have to project value add. So value add is complex. And putting it in a narrative and explaining it is the task of the chief statistician of a country. But we also have to demonstrate and illustrate the pain that politics, which is the way we organize society, politics, by politics I mean the way we agree to organize ourselves as society, can have major, major, major implications on measurement and the complexity of the narrative. So what do we need to do, and why are we here? It is to deal with how we organize ourselves so that we can enable a narrative that can help us implement the SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Polly. I've got to figure out where I'm going to die if I live in South Africa based on this. Thank you. Manu, the floor is yours. Manu, you have a couple of different affiliations. Remind us where you're coming from.
Well, originally from Brittany, France. So I live in New York. I'm the director of Data Pop Alliance, and I'm a visiting scholar at MIT Media Lab. And my background is in development economics and demography, so I was very happy to see some of the slides shown before. So yeah, you can see my presentation. So the title is pretty ambitious, hopefully inspiring. We'll have only 8 minutes, so we'll see what we can cover in 8 minutes. So I've decided to title this presentation Statistical Measurement and Societal Development in the Age of Data Abundance and Algorithmic Analysis. So it's, as I said, very, very ambitious. Obviously, I'm not going to go over all of that, but this is to give you a flavor. Initially, actually, the title was something like Features, Functions, and Future of Measurement, but I thought it was even more complicated. How can I control the slides? Can I control the slides? No, I have to, I don't, here. Thank you. Okay, all right, so this is a picture of a party. So I decided to put this picture because on the first day, so the opening, I think the minister said to explain why we care about measuring. So and this is like this sort of like underlying question: why do we measure, and also what do we measure? Who measures for whom? So like a sort of theory of measurement. That's what I'm trying to get at. So one of the points was, if you have a party, it's good to know how many people are going to show up, or it's good to know to count how many people are there, so that you can furnish, like give them drinks and food, etc., etc. If you look at this picture, you can think of many of the things you can measure. You can measure happiness, you can measure how many times people interact, etc., what they drink, and they can affect change their behaviors based on that. So there's just a number of ways and pathways through which measurement or rationals for measuring things. Now, so we have this theory or assumption that by measuring something, we actually care about the thing we measure, and that we're going to have an effect on the thing we measure. Often, in our, let's say, like UN circles, we think that governments are benevolent and are well-meaning, such that they want better data, and that the world is in, let's say, not a completely state of disarray, but it's not great because governments don't have data. I think there's partial truth, but only partial. And I do think, so this is a cartoon that I sketched a few years ago during a conference when I was pretty frustrated with hearing, oh, if only we had better data. And I thought, it's not really the only problem that the world is not doing so great. So hopefully the cartoon is self-explanatory about what I'm trying to get at. So, measurement. How many of you have kids here in the room? You can do a quick show of hands. Okay, quite a few. So I have 2 young daughters. I don't really measure them. I don't really, I measure them maybe like once a year when they go to the doctors. I don't weight them either. We as adults often weigh ourselves because this is the standard theory. We measure ourselves such that, we weigh ourselves such that we can change course if we put on weight or lost weight. But the point here is that even when you care deeply about something, you don't always measure it. So I think the notion that you can't manage what you can't measure, or that measurement is the necessary condition for doing good stuff, is not entirely right. So there are things that you just do, or you try to do right, just because you think it's the right thing to do, and you don't need measurement for that. So this is to introduce a sort of like a caveat in this theory of measurement. Now, if you look back at history, so this is a timeline in this book, very interesting book by Eric Bryn-Johnson and Andrew McAfee about what happened to the world over the past millennium. And basically, as you know, this is the first age of the machine was the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine, and all of a sudden, things that were flat for centuries, population growth, average income, or almost flat, all of a sudden took off. And the question is, of course, why? And we know it's the steam engine. I mean, there's a body of research on what created this historical inflection point. But my question here is, what was the role of measurement in that? These are measures so this index that you see was done a posteriori. It was not done, we need to do this and we're going to tweak, et cetera, et cetera. So it is also to ask ourselves, what is the role in measurement in societal development? So this brings me to actually one of the initial themes or central theme of this panel, which was initially we wanted to title it Beyond GDP. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the debates around the shortcomings of GDP, which led to the development of a number of additional indices or goals and targets and indicators. So as also some of you or most of you may know, GDP was essentially invented in the 1930s as a measure of production by or as part of the development of national accounting income systems by Simon Kuznets, who won a Nobel Prize, not for that, but for other reasons. And what this slide here is basically telling us the GDP is a good example of stuff you measure because you want to affect it. And actually, it has a lot of bad consequences. There are lots of bad detrimental consequences with the fact that GDP is the alpha and omega of economic policy, which most of you here, or all of you here, are aware of. But still, it falls under this nice theory of you measure, oh, it's going up or down, or we check what worked, what didn't work, and we sort of change course. But GDP was invented in an industrial era and a data-poor era. And I think the shortcomings of GDP as a measure of, not welfare, but as a measure of how an economy is doing, how a society is doing, these shortcomings are becoming even more salient in the age of data abundance and in the age of algorithms. And in the few minutes that I have left, I will try to sort of give a picture of, in a sense, of the future of measurement and its political economy implications as well. By the way, one of the reasons why GDP is an even bad measure of welfare in the age of data is because it does not capture the consumption of free data. So this is an argument and something that Eric Bryn-Johnson has made a number of times, and you can look into it further if you're interested. So we are now in this day and age of the SDGs, the post-2015 agenda, and we know we need to measure other stuff than GDP. So this is sort of like the world we live in. So this is the world of so-called big data, these crumbs that we leave behind as we move around, as we interact with devices and services. So this is from 2008. These are 100 million credit card transactions in San Francisco. So out of that, you can do a number of things. You can measure a number of things. You can correlate that with a number of so-called ground truth data statistics. And these are, for instance, tribes. So these computer scientists at MIT Media Lab said, well, who are these people? Can you create groups that sort of look alike, behaves in certain ways? And obviously, this is the business model of most data companies to try and capture their consumers and societies through this data. So it's just to give a glimpse of the possibilities, and I will finish in 2 minutes. Now, there are huge, and this is it's like a short comic strip that I did to explain how you can actually use these data to measure poverty, for instance, through correlations with ground truth data. Now, this other cartoon gets to the politics of it, the political economy of it, which is the risks of elite capture. That's why we also titled this panel, Capturing the 21st Century Through Data and Algorithms. Are there risks of elite capture of these data? Well, the answer is yes, but we have to do something about it. And it also gets to the privacy concerns of being looked at all the time in real time. So against that, there are a number of things that are being thought about or that are being done. I really believe in the concept and notion of open algorithms to go around and address some of these risks and fears of elite capture, of a sort of an Orwellian state, as we are trying to capture the health of societies in more complex, finer, and more interesting ways. So these are some of the pointers. And now I will just end by mentioning briefly a project that we've been working on with a number of partners. So the Open Algorithms Project, or OPAL, which is both a technology or technological and also a community or a political platform for engagement of societies around open algorithms, through open algorithms, to essentially send algorithms to private sector data. We're talking about the political economy of this field. So to send open algorithms certified that can be redressed, that can be held to account, to private sector data, and then to, in a sense, spit out indicators or statistics that these countries, as pilot cases, Senegal and Colombia, these societies feel are worth measuring. So I think this is one of the approaches that we have to take to make measurement more meaningful in the 21st century, both the outcomes of measurement, but also the processes of measurement. So these are some of the points I wanted to make. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
You do.
Middle of the panel. I think I'll
Please.
just stay right here. So my name is Anne. Thanks, Pauline. My name is Anne Jellema. I'm the CEO of the World Wide Web Foundation, which was established by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the web, to further his vision of a web and digital technology that truly benefits all of humanity. And that's why we are so centrally concerned about data and the future of data, and whether or not it will truly benefit all of the people. And Ola has set me up so nicely for the points that I wanted to make. I think the Ignorance Project of the Gapminder Foundation shows so clearly how disconnected people, citizens are from official data. Even interested, engaged, educated people like ourselves in this room. And he also articulated so well why that's a problem. That our disconnect from data and statistics leads to apathy. It can also lead to distrust. It can lead to resentment. I mean, it's well known, for example, that the public in many countries vastly overestimates the number of refugees in their country and the amount of state assistance that they're actually receiving. It can lead to denial of very real and pressing problems, as was the case for some years in South Africa around the extent of the HIV crisis. There was also a failure or refusal to acknowledge that women were actually the hardest hit by HIV for many years, again, due to failure to comprehend and engage with the data showing precisely that women were the worst affected. So it's vitally important that we turn this around, and that's why the data revolution and the roadmap that this conference is going to produce is so important. Of course, data can do a lot to improve people's lives without their direct engagement. A good example is one of the action points in the outcome from this conference, which is to include women's unpaid care work in national accounts and satellite national accounts. That simple change will make a huge difference for millions, billions of women around the world by making sure that their contribution to the economy is actually recorded and therefore valued and therefore reflected in policy decisions. Another great example is improving the collection of data relevant to climate change so that scientists and policymakers can do more to ensure that the poorest people, who are also the hardest hit by climate change, are better protected. However, even though data can do a great deal, better data, more data can do a great deal to improve people's lives and achieve the SDGs without them even being aware of that data. Our experience at the Web Foundation suggests that the benefits are far greater when people do actually participate, when they are involved in designing, collecting, understanding, and using data. And my colleague, Nena, who I think many of you have come across already at this forum, spoke very eloquently yesterday about a project that we did in Côte d'Ivoire with the UN Foundation Data2X and the Millennium Challenge Corporation, where we were able to involve women's rights activists, health workers, tech experts, and data scientists in figuring out how data could be used to tackle the very real problems facing women in Côte d'Ivoire. And the result was not only that they figured out ways to use existing data, but they also identified data gaps. They identified new types of data that, if it were to be collected and made openly available to all these stakeholders, could result in dramatic improvements. So, for example, they identified ways in which just making it possible for clinics and hospitals to share information about bed shortages and equipment shortages would enable those clinics to shift women to a clinic where their particular medical problem could be dealt with. Pregnant women, this is, and Côte d'Ivoire has one of the highest rates of maternal mortality in the world. So just by doing that, they could ensure that pregnant women were not turned away due to a temporary shortage at a particular clinic, but were able to receive treatment. In Banda Aceh in Indonesia, we were able to work with community groups, parents, and education authorities to engage with the data that was available to identify performance problems with particular schools and figure out ways in which they could be solved. And it wasn't just the diagnosis, it was also that in the process of sharing and discussing that data, trust was built between the government officials and the community groups who historically had just not been able to work together or reach agreement. We've also been involved in developing the open contracting data standard, which is a way for millions and millions of pages of very dense legalese public sector contracts to be made legible and very easy to analyze, so that patterns of corruption and waste can be identified, and so that small business can compete on an equal footing with bigger businesses. In Ukraine, they have saved $1.5 million of public sector budgets in only 3 months through the increased scrutiny and competition that open contracting has enabled. And this kind of data will be even more powerful when it's possible to join it up with data on company ownership, including beneficial or shell company ownership, anonymous company ownership, which we're also working with a bunch of other groups to make available. So these are examples of how the data revolution could empower citizens to engage with government to find collective solutions to problems and make the SDGs achievable in a way that will also make sure that people can be involved and care about these goals, which often seem so remote or so abstract, or as Ola said, so impossible. However, for centuries, the collection of data by states has been a very non-participatory affair. The capacity to collect and understand and use and act on data has been monopolized by the state, and for some very good reasons. And chief among those reasons, I think, and it's important not to lose this as we embark on the data revolution, is accountability. Polly and his agency are democratically accountable for the quality of the data they collect, and they also have to take a mandate from government in terms of the types of new data that might be required to solve social problems. That's extremely important to remember. However, technology and the web and what Emmanuel is calling data abundance do make it possible to change this and to shift towards more participatory and open ways of using data, and we need to act on that potential. Ironically, the rise of big data, data abundance, could actually make things worse rather than better, and that is a huge risk, the risk of elite capture, as Emmanuel was calling it. So as the majority of socially relevant data is now actually being controlled by the private sector rather than by government, citizens' rights over data and ability to control data could actually diminish even further. What we call private data, most of it, the most valuable and socially relevant parts of that data is actually our data. It's our data. If you think about the data that you have generated just these past few days while you've been taking Uber, Skyping with your family back at home, registering for this conference, using Google Maps to get around, those of us just in this room have generated a huge amount of data, which doesn't belong to us now. It belongs to Google, it belongs to Uber, it belongs to Facebook, and they are not accountable for how they use that data and under what conditions. So that is also an enormous problem. The collection of the data and the algorithms into which it is plugged is a challenge that the data revolution needs to confront. So in conclusion, what can be done? What do we need to make sure is included in the roadmap for this conference? First of all, we have to open up government data to create a data commons that we all can access and use as the basis for sustainable development. Only 10% of government data in the world is currently fully open. That's non-personally identifiable data. And by open, we mean that it is available online under an open license. It's fully reusable. There's no charge for accessing it. You can get it in bulk, and it's machine readable. And half of the open data sets that do exist were found in just the top 10 OECD countries. Only 2 were in Africa. So that's 2. 2 data sets were fully open. And of all of the data sets in Africa. And national statistics, by which we don't mean personally identifiable data, we don't even mean micro-level data, we mean aggregate demographic and economic indicators. Health and education statistics, this is administrative data on school and hospital and clinic performance. It includes things like vaccination rates and attendance rates that Ola was speaking about earlier. Only 12% of that is fully open. Environment data, similarly poor. And again, we're just talking there about very minimal basic data on things like carbon emissions and deforestation. Government spending data is one of the least open data sets in the world. So just 2% of that is fully open. So a lot of data is available online now, which is great, that's progress, but very little of it is fully open and available for you to download and reuse and combine with other data as you like. We have to extend the definition of open data to include public interest data that's collected by companies. And that's where the work that Emmanuel's project is doing is so important, because at the same time as public interest data needs to be made available, we also have to recognize that how it's used by governments and by others raises very important privacy and data protection considerations. And data protection, understanding of data protection principles needs to be hardwired into the data revolution and into the capacity building that is so vital for this revolution. It's badly missing in most countries of the world. So data protection laws are non-existent or inadequate in many, many countries, and very few of them have been updated to reflect the realities of big data and the data trails that we leave behind us every minute of our waking day. We need open source algorithms. I completely agree with Emmanuel that citizens need to be able to access and interrogate and challenge the basis of algorithmic decisions that affect them. So we've seen in the past year already, there have been a number of studies showing how algorithms are being used, for example, in the US to make decisions about things like access to social welfare benefits and probation and jail sentencing decisions in ways that may improve equity and social efficiency and result in better decisions, but may not, but may actually entrench existing patterns of discrimination. Those are things that politicians, elected representatives, and citizens need to be able to interrogate and challenge in exactly the same way that they can challenge a census, a set of national statistics. And finally, we need huge investment in both digital and data literacy as the basis for informed citizenship in the future. Just as reading, writing, and arithmetic have been the basis for informed citizenship in the 19th and 20th centuries, now that needs to extend to digital and data literacy. So in conclusion, the Open Data Charter is a global effort to advance the principles of freely available data that everyone can use and reuse to advance sustainable development. And we urge everyone to get involved and endorse and support and contribute to the best principles that the Open Data Charter is advancing. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So if I want to do that, what's the website for the Open Data Charter?
OpenDataCharter.org.
OpenDataCharter.org. Okay, great. So I've got a question for the panelists. I've got several questions. I keep hearing a lot about the word trust throughout. So what does the word trust mean to each of you when you think about statistics and data? Let me start with you, Manu. What does trust mean?
So when I talk about trust, I mean indeed different things. One is trust within societies. So notions of like bonding and bridging capitals, how different groups interact and how different groups trust each other. And I think that's a very strong, that's my assumption or hypothesis, that it's a very strong measure of the well-being of the health of a society. So that's one aspect, so the trust within society. The other one is the trust indeed that one builds as you engage in data collection processes, for instance. So the sort of like the engagement process that Anne mentioned, and I think this is a very strong like rationale for official statistics. The very fact of conducting a census, for instance, builds trust by and large. And thirdly, so it's a process through trust. It's a trust through process. And thirdly, it is indeed trust in statistics themselves. So it is trust in the outcomes. It is the fact that we can have it sort of like a democratic debate on the basis of a shared understanding or shared trust that a figure X is indeed figure X. We can discuss whether it's 0.9x or 1.1x, but we can't have democratic debates if people say, well, your X, I think it's actually 5x or half X. So building trust in outcomes in official statistics is also of paramount importance, and it goes through data literacy and engagement and advocacy, etc.
Polly, when you think of the word trust, what does that mean for you? Is it?
Well, trust, it's about integrity. It's being sure that you will not do what you do when you are in private. That which you will not do in public, you will also not do in private. That's integrity. That when there is no oversight, you are able, through integrity, to do what integrity prescribes for you to do. So what does it mean in official statistics? Obviously, yes, trust, belief, but trust is also about justice. And justice should not only be done, must be seen to be done. So trust, while it's something that drives your integrity and conscience, but it's not only done, but it must be seen to be done. That's why we have the 10 fundamental principles that guide that notion of trust, because we know we are fallible. And we know that we should repent. Unfortunately, in the fundamental principles, we don't have a process of repentance. There isn't a process that says, well, yes, you have been a prodigal child.
Like the INDEC in Argentina, right, where they lied on the inflation statistics for 10 years.
Well, I got my fingers got bent at the last Statistics Commission side event for raising these issues, both in Argentina, Greece, as well as here in South Africa, where I personally overestimated CPI for 14 months. And, well, it shouldn't be fear of my losing a job that should guide integrity. It must be the ability to say, this is what has happened. And, of course, the second part is, yes, I'll fix it, and I'll see to fix it, but that's not pleading the case for any form of judgment on myself. It can't be. Those two cases are very separate. And I think, I suspect, of course, it was also the case of Canada's census, long form. Now they have come back to the short form, they've come back to the long form. And I think as a statistics community, the problem that I've seen in our community is that we are too gentle with each other, we are too cordial at times, and we really do not use the case studies of bad practice and confront it, and we don't have a mechanism for dealing with that. So if we have to have authority and have trust, we must be seen to be trusted, and we have to have mechanisms to do so. So that's what builds trust.
Ola.
Let's see. I'll try a different angle. I think trust is a feeling, an emotion. I actually trust Polly. I don't know why. I just trust him. See? I just trust this guy. Do you trust me? I bought this suit. Do you trust me? I look like a responsible person, right? Why don't you check my knowledge instead of following your emotions? We build up trust. It's called confidence as well. And the overconfidence in this room is enormous. I just measured your knowledge. Unfortunately, we're just human beings. The first ones we trust among all is ourselves, and often we shouldn't. We're often so wrong about the world. I know that because I'm a white Caucasian male, and I speak to other white Caucasian males, and they always trust each other just because they belong to the group, you know? But when I measure the knowledge, I stop trusting them. You just scored worse than chimpanzees on all my 3 questions. Okay? And I'm going to disclose this information because I want this group to be trustworthy by measuring, not by pretending. Okay? I think that kind of concludes. The overconfidence is a major human inability which has been measured in cognitive psychology during the last 30 years, and it has broken down the naive rationality of how human beings work. If we don't start measuring our own knowledge, we will continue pretending forever, and then we don't focus on the biggest problems on this planet because we just don't know the numbers about this planet. Thanks.
Thank you. So Anne, what does trust mean for you?
Well, funnily enough, I was just looking at a news item that came out yesterday, the Edelman Global Trust Barometer. And the headline says there's been a global implosion of trust. Trust in business, trust in government, trust in the media, trust in NGOs is at an all-time low. And that's something that we in this room need to take very, very seriously. And you know, as Polly said, we need to hold ourselves responsible for starting to restore some of that trust, because without trust, people can know, they can learn the statistics that Ola was quizzing us on, but they won't believe them. And you know, we saw a lot of the damage that can do in 2016, for example, in the Brexit vote and the US elections, where things became so polarized and so poisonous. And all of the statistical experts in the world probably could not have changed that discourse. So how do we rebuild trust? I think a really interesting lesson from the open source community has been that the more people can be directly involved in interrogating something, picking it apart, looking for flaws, making suggestions for improvements, the higher their trust becomes. And that's really important for the statistical community to take on board, because I think as a community of experts who are the guardians of difficult and technical methodology, there's sometimes fear about opening up data, that it will be misused because people don't understand statistical methods properly. But in fact, the lesson from the open source community suggests the opposite, that the more we do open up data and create opportunities for people to engage with it, to try to find errors, to look for flaws, the more their trust will slowly grow, and the better the data will get as well. So I think we should actively welcome contributions from civil society, from academics, from concerned citizens who can help us to improve not only the completeness of statistics in terms of making suggestions for new types of data to be collected and how it might be collected, but also the accuracy of it by looking for problems and pointing those out. And that's a small starting point, I think.
Okay, so we have a brave new world. There's big data. There's new forms of measurement. There's new technologies. So if each of you had a magic wand, what would you want information would you want to measure? What would you want to capture if you, given that there's sort of this new possibilities out there, what would you want to measure or what should we be measuring? And I'll start with you, Manu.
I mean, I think at this point, we should maybe ask the audience.
I will. This is my question to you guys, and then I will. I've got 20 minutes for the audience.
No, sure, but it's just it's a way of saying that it's also a matter of like finding out what people care about, what matters to them, and I think there's very or too little in the way of actually coming up with relevant measures and relevant outcomes or processes for so the notion of participation, as I said, like the very notion of engaging with people and asking for their input, et cetera, to me matters as much or more than the outcome itself.
Okay. Other folks, if you had your druthers, what would you want to measure? Is it global well-being? Is it gross national happiness? Is it new measures of poverty? What would you want to measure with the new capacities that we have? Polly, is there something you've always wanted to say? I really wish we could get our arms around X or Y question.
Yes, I would argue that public opinion is very flimsy, but public opinion counts, and it's very important because it reflects the inner being, the skepticism, the anger, and all that. So I think we need to really understand public opinion. In the last election of South Africa, the local government election, we measured the physical, that there are so many houses that have been built, there is so much electricity, there is so much that. Yet when we ask for opinions of satisfaction, the public, for the province where we measured, and that study is published now, showed deep sense of dissatisfaction. The question then is, why is this dissatisfaction when the physical is progressively being delivered? And I think if we did that, then the level of discourse and the quality of that discourse will deepen and will deepen public participation. Okay. Yeah.
Ola, what are we not measuring?
So I think I started by answering that question and knowledge, and we're not measuring if. Can I ask one more knowledge question? Raise your hand if you have been involved in an MDG communication campaign during the last 10 years. Anyone that was involved informing the public? Oh, no, you're lying. You were related to, you did something, okay. Did you measure the impact? And the whole idea, or did you monitor the impact you have in terms of knowledge when you distribute information about monitoring? No. So let's start using this practice on our own. And I would not do the template democracy answer, which we just heard. Ask the public what they think we should do. We are the experts, okay? We are the most informed people on this planet, and we're still less informed than chimpanzees, okay? But we are to decide how to change this. We're not gonna turn out to these voters and ask them how they want us to do it. That is giving up our responsibility. Then I think you should leave the room. We should take this seriously and do our job even better. Now we got tools. The only reason we can measure ignorance is because we got reliable facts. When those didn't exist, we couldn't measure the ignorance because we're just opinions, you know? Now we can do this, so now we can improve. So measuring knowledge and having a knowledge certificate, and that's what we're doing. We're developing a knowledge certificate which we're offering to organizations. Measure your staff and then go into therapy session. Because it's measure your knowledge about your basic facts in your organization. You're gonna be so depressed, so keep the doors closed and then change how you do things. and who you trust with what. This is not measured, we're just pretending. And this is across province data and international data. The activists score worse than everyone else in their own field. I can repeat this again and again because they're so engaged by women's rights or refugee situation. They exaggerate and their worldview is so dramatic and they are so overconfident in them being the experts. And they are the experts in some sense. But this kind of self-monitoring is not happening at all. And it's skewing the worldview back and forth with the opinions of these democratic elections. Final point, in US, 5% answered correctly when we asked about the extreme poverty rate trend. We asked, the extreme poverty in the world during 20 years, did it drop to half? Did it remain stable? Did it double? The poverty rate of this planet. I didn't ask this in this room because I know that you know it. It dropped. This group knows it. In US, 5% answered that question correctly. The rest of the US public believe that extreme poverty is increasing or being stable. 95% means all the Trump voters and probably almost all of Hillary's voters too. So we shouldn't point fingers at Trump voters, calling them ignorant. We should pull that finger down and maybe point it at ourselves first. Then we can start pointing fingers at others. Because everybody is very, very ignorant about the basic facts. We have tons of opinions and blaming. And the trust game becomes a blame game, where you just confess that you made a mistake, and they didn't clap their hands. How often does that happen, that an official person says that I made a mistake, you know? So this psychology we have to change. We have to start admitting that we're human beings and we screw up with information all the time. The only way to keep track of it is by monitoring knowledge again and again and again. Thank you.
Okay, Anne, what would you want to measure?
Well, I think it's pretty clear from my remarks earlier that I believe that under disaggregated data, more data relevant to women. The second thing that I would ask for is actually not new data, but joining up the existing data that we already have. I think that you really unlock the power of data when you can join it up, when you can link it, compare it, and that it's really hard to do at the moment. So linking data sets in ways that make it easier to compare and analyze and pull out richer stories from them would be my other ask. And I have to confess that I made a mistake with information as well.
Is this like therapy? Like we're having like a group therapy session. This is great. Hi, Anne. Like we can say, you know.
I'm a what?
We're going to have a group hug afterwards, too. It's great.
So my mistake is that the Open Data Charter website is not .org, it's .net, opendatacharter.net.
Right.
I confess.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so we do have time for questions. There's a microphone up there. There's a lot of smart people. Go up to the microphone. I think that's how we're going to do it. Is that right? There's a microphone up there. I think we need I'm assuming we need a microphone. I'm more than willing to call on people. I don't know how we've done this before, so if you guys, okay, so this gentleman up here, so go ahead, stand up, say your name, keep your question or comment short, and I'll repeat it, and then we'll get 2 or 3 of these, okay? So go ahead.
Good morning. Thanks for all the contribution. I'm Carlo Bakker. I'm from the Netherlands. I have a question with regards to the return on investment of data governance or decision intelligence. Where can I find proof? In my understanding, if we can prove that data governance and decision intelligence has a real return on investment for government and private sector, I try to Google and I try to find, but where can I find evidence-based?
This gentleman up here, thank you.
Sorry, my name is Kevin Govender. I'm with the International Astronomical Union. We have an Office of Astronomy for Development. My question relates to the natural sciences or the blue sky sciences, physics, astronomy. They always claim to be pushing the limits of what we can do with data and big data. There's also a huge science communication community within the blue sky sciences. So my question is, what role do the physics astronomy communities, institutes such as CERN and the Square Kilometer Array, what role do they have to play in the social statistical data landscape?
Can I get some gender balance? I'd like to call on someone other than a dude. So how about this woman here, please?
Thank you. Helen McGilvray from the International Statistical Institute. 2 questions. The first is someone measuring denial? And the second question is, why is it so difficult in education for the instructors, the teachers, the authorities, to allow students to investigate what they want to investigate?
Okay, that's 4 really good questions. So ROI on data. Let's throw the science community. Okay. Well, I'm gonna do 4, and then if I can get another round, I will try to do that. But I think we've got 4 questions. That's a lot to cover for these panelists. And let's see if we get a chance. I'll try and cover others. Okay, Manu.
Okay, so I'm just going
to have to answer all of them.
Yeah, no, sure. So on the question on evidence, it is indeed a central question. It's a very hard one to measure the, in a sense, the societal value of data and statistical systems, etc. To my knowledge, but I might be ignorant, to my knowledge, there are very little studies that actually scientifically measure the return on these investments. There's one that I could point to in the UK, I believe, on the value of opening data. But I don't know about if there are studies about measuring denial. I believe there are. There are studies, qualitative studies about perceptions and how they might differ from facts, for instance. But more broadly, I mean, since we're almost to a close, and then this may be the last time I speak, and just to play sort of like devil's advocate, I mean, I'm a scientist, I'm a demographer, I believe in facts, I believe in science, I believe in technology, etc. But I also like history, and I think history, one of the lessons of history is that it's a bit more complex than advancing through only like facts and experts' knowledge, etc. I also believe very strongly in the power of empathy. So just to take a bit of a not opposite, but a bit slightly different view from Ola. I don't think, for instance, that, and I know you do this like stir arguments and discussions, and it's all fine and good, but I don't think calling people ignorant is actually will give them an incentive to become less ignorant. I think the objective is the right one, but I think we have to be a bit more, maybe a bit more, have more empathy for one another, and also realize the limitations, indeed, as you point out, our own limitations, the limitations of science, the limitations of technology. That's why I still believe in democracy, and I'm sure, I know you do, but I believe in democratic processes, and I believe in participation and engagement, and I'm just worried of this, like a tyranny of experts or tyranny of data.
Okay, so Anne, it could be return on investment, could be the role of the science community, measurement of denial, this issue of pedagogy, and if you also want to, if you want to give any kind of closing thought, I'd welcome that too.
Yeah, as Emmanuel said, the return on investment for data governance and open data is an area that does need a lot more research. I think the studies that have been done suggest that the benefits of opening up government data range between 0.4 to 1.5% of GDP in OECD economies. But you all are statisticians, you know the difficulties with models. So we do need more granular work, and I think at the same time we also need to consider what are the opportunity costs of not pursuing data governance and opening up data. So what are the opportunity costs of continuing to invest large amounts of public sector funds in solutions to pressing problems that may be misguided or that may fail to meet their mark because we have inadequate data. And anyone who can design a methodology to look at both the return on investment and the opportunity cost is the winner of my personal Data Revolution Prize for 2017. But it is extremely important to consider how much money has been wasted over the past just 10 years pursuing development solutions that were misguided or mistargeted or ended up being captured by better off groups because data was missing or inadequate. And how much of that could we recoup if we did have better data and more statistical capacity and we opened up more of that data? The pedagogy question, I think, is really, really important because it is both the central opportunity and the central challenge of digital and data literacy. If we want people to become digitally literate and data literate, it's not about teaching them an authoritative version of how the world is. It's about enabling them, empowering them to interrogate different versions of reality and create different versions of reality. That's what coding is all about. That's what statistics is all about, is understanding modeling, right, and probability and uncertainty. And the existing education system is not equipped to do that. I think the great thing about technology is that if you do allow young people to experiment with it and play with it, they start to discover for themselves. So you can have a teacher who's never been equipped to teach in that creative, participative way. If the students are just given freedom to start playing around with the technology and with the data, they can start to do that for themselves. But a real solution means bringing the teachers along with. And I think many of the approaches to digital and data literacy so far have left teachers out of the equation by saying, well, we'll just give everybody a tablet or an app or a program, and that will solve the problem of teachers. We need to make sure that teacher education is transformed to cope with the new digital world that we're living in. And it's so, so important. So thank you for raising that question.
Okay. Polly, which and any of all of those would you want to take on?
Well, I think on return on investment, I think I'll go back to Florence Nightingale because she used data to discover and solve serious medical problems, antibiotics. So there is obviously return on investment when policy is based on facts. So I think, and then of course associated with that is really to understand that data is non-rival. It's a non-rival commodity, or rather it's a non-rival commodity because it functions in the world of the virtual. And the more we have it, there are no marginal returns. It's increasing returns to scale. That's the simple law of economics. And by doing so, we get better and better. So that property of non-rivalry is very, very crucial, and we have to understand it. But by the same, and therefore, by that token, it cannot be private because it can be used by all of us. It cannot be private. Importantly, because all private data, like cell phone, as you say, is my data. And the sum total of us own that data. So the governance is the critical issue.
Is open data the same as naked data? You had a view on this, Polly.
Indeed. I mean, we really should differentiate between transparency and being naked. We shouldn't allow nakedness, but we should allow transparency.
I'm pulling my jacket in a little tighter.
And by that, we mean, in medical science, I think the biggest advances in medical science have been individualized data following on cancer cases and the like, and major breakthroughs have been made. And I think as a matter of looking at commons, we should be able, through that process, protect privacy while running the risk of exposing nakedness. If you look at the Masai Mara, for those other animals to cross the river, many have to be eaten by crocodiles, but more are able to cross the river. So I think if we look at the idea of commons and how do we sacrifice in order to advance, that is a matter of discourse, that's a matter of agreements, and that's a matter of saying how do we compensate for those who have sacrificed. And it's that kind of thing in a more civilized way. Do we measure denial? Yes, I think we should. And I think what all I say is the tobacco companies were denying that smoking causes cancer. When this evidence was advanced, they cast doubt, they threw a lot of money at it, and everything. And I think we need to really fight that. And so the political economy of evidence, political economy of data is very, very crucial because it plays in the space of investment. I mean, the stock JSE here in South Africa or the Wall Street particularly, if you look at the Le Mans case, and I encourage you to buy the Devil's Casino, and you'll understand what happens on how data gets twisted. Of course, we were shocked in 2008, 2009. But what happened? Wall Street executives were back with their bonuses, with everything that led Lehman down. It's back. And what has happened to the statistics community? The Land Eagles meeting that Obama called and met said, statisticians, we need to know more about this so that we can have stability. How far have we captured or at least responded to that? Our task is to respond to that because it's coming again. That cycle is coming again.
Okay, let me just take a moment. Could we thank our South African host? I think we ought to give Polly an additional thank you. I think it's been a really, really great meeting. Polly, could I just take one more second before I turn it over to Ola? Could you just give us, could you give us some parting thought about what's the message you want this audience to take away from this conversation?
The message, I think, I see in big data and statistics and other things, I see the emergence of tyranny of data. And I think that will rob us of the democratic rights that we have. And we should guard against the tyranny of money, data, and statisticians by ensuring that we democratize the processes that we go through and go back to the philosophy of objectivity, where it is about sitting down, discussing, and getting the best solutions. Otherwise, there is a real danger of tyranny of data, statistics, and money.
Okay, thank you. Amen. Thank you to that.
Okay, I'll try to answer the value of data, the return, and the astronomy question, because in my mind it's the same. Just a quick answer. What is the value of pavement on the streets or sidewalks where we can walk? If you want to measure if we should have sidewalks or not, you're not going to be able to measure it. They are used for all kinds of purposes and they improve the society. Some things are very, very difficult to link the input to one output, and then you will fail if you try to do it. The murderers, the serial killers, use the same sidewalks as everyone else. So we should probably not have sidewalks, right? Because it's dangerous. They can run there and kill us. So free, open data and investments which we don't know what they are good for, like astronomy. You probably have a hard case, astronomers, to argue that you need more money. But the CERN Institute, where Tim Berners-Lee worked, was where the web was created, or he actually did it before that. We never really know what comes out of science. We still have to invest in it, as long as it's high quality and it's at the brink of our knowledge. We should go there all the time, I think. But we can never know if it's worth it, unfortunately. So we cannot know a lot of things which are very important, and that is the limitation of data. And I agree with Polly that the world, we need data to understand the world, but data is not enough to understand the world. There are all these other things, and the narratives, of course, are important. Let me then try to bridge over to the question about education and the usability of a word like ignorance, if I change your question. And that's my final remark. You're absolutely right that a negative word like ignorance is useless in certain context. But it can wake your minds up, if I use a strong word instead of a weak word. My wife is a senior user experience designer, and we were at Google before, and she made this point that you just made, and you're absolutely right, that it's very bad to promote a negative word. So then we invented the positive version of it, which we call factfulness, which is a state of mind where you are aware of your biases and have experience of not trusting things and your own assumptions. And practicing this in classrooms is what we're now trying to promote and experimenting with. But it's very difficult to measure if it works. But teaching a practical, critical mindset and experience of how we misinterpret data, I think that should happen in every classroom on this planet within 15 years. If that doesn't happen, the critical thinking skills, not the facts, but the skills to be skeptical when you see things in media and realize, oh, this is biased. I always hear about shark attacks. You know, it doesn't matter if it's correct. The shark attack actually happened. You can't check the source to unskew a worldview. You will figure out, yeah, there was a shark attack, but it's irrelevant. You're seeing irrelevant information, and you should be aware of that. Every child should be aware of that. So these skills we call factfulness, and in our next session, you and I are going to be discussing exactly this. So let's continue later, and I'm done now. Thanks.
Please join me in thanking the panel.